Bonjour tous. Welcome to the 24th meeting of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. We have the great privilege of having the Minister of Industry before us, the Honourable James Moore, and accompanying the Minister today from the Department of Industry is John Nubley, Deputy Minister, along with Robert Dunlop, Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Innovation Sector, Joanne Bernard, Director General, Resource Planning and Investments Branch, Paul Haluka, Director General, Strategic Policy Branch, and Lawrence Hanson, Assistant Deputy Minister, Spectrum, Information Technology and Telecommunications. Folks, we have 1 hour today. We will let the Minister begin with his opening remarks, and then we will determine what time we have left, and I'll give you an idea of the amount of time each member has for the question rotation. Minister, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Merci, Mr. Président. Bonjour. Je vous remercie de me donner.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for giving the opportunity to make this presentation to the committee today. The Deputy Minister from my department, John Nubley, is with me today with other senior officials.
Important work that our government is doing and how we have delivered on what we said was the top priority for Canadians in this session of Parliament, which of course is creating jobs and economic growth. This work begins by laying the groundwork for our economic future, which I believe is a digital future for Canada. Last month in Waterloo, I was pleased to launch Digital Canada 150, an ambitious plan for Canadians to take full advantages of the opportunities in the digital age. It's a plan that sets clear goals for a connected and competitive Canada by the time we celebrate our 150th birthday in 2017. Digital Canada 150 is based on submissions that were received by thousands of Canadians during consultations that were held all across the country. There are 5 pillars, 39 new initiatives, and 1 national plan for 35 million Canadians. It's a broad-based plan that will guide Canada's digital future. And I'll give you one example. In Digital Canada 150, we connect over 280,000 households with access to high-speed internet at 5 megabits per second. That's fast enough to stream high-definition video, enable e-commerce, and connecting Canadians with educational opportunities and career opportunities in all parts of this country. And it's a bold plan when you consider that Canada is the 2nd largest country in the world in size, but 37th largest in population. To be able to tie us all together with that digital infrastructure is something that I think we should all be very proud of. And our plan is also based and has been praised for its vision. Google Canada called Digital Canada 150 a plan that, quote, will accelerate digital adoption and technological innovation among Canadian businesses, which is essential for Canada to remain a global economic power. La Fédération canadienne des municipalités a publié la déclaration.
Federation of Municipalities said the following: rural communities need enough broadband capacity to play a full part in the new economy, and I think that our new plan will do this.
Digital Canada 150, quote, the foundation for a connected and competitive Canada. And of course, connecting Canadians also involves making the right decisions to ensure access to wireless spectrum. Canadian consumers increasingly rely on their iPhones, their iPads, their smartphones, tablets, Blackberries to stay connected with loved ones, to work, to organize their businesses, to organize their studies, and to use it for every aspect of everyday life. In March, I announced the results of the 700 megahertz spectrum auction, which is the highest quality spectrum ever auctioned in Canada. 700 megahertz spectrum travels longer distances, it requires fewer cell towers, penetrates through building walls, elevators, and even through underground parking lots, which of course means better connectivity, fewer drop calls, and more effective use of technology. As you will no doubt remember, consumers were, of course, the big winners following the auction results. 10 Canadian companies in over 100 rounds of bidding that lasted 5 weeks resulted in a total of 97 licenses being awarded to 8 Canadian companies. Quality wireless spectrum was acquired by Rogers, TELUS, and Bell, with a 4th wireless player obtaining spectrum capacity in every region of Canada. The total revenue generated from this auction was $5.27 billion, proving the critics wrong and earning the greatest return ever for a wireless auction in Canada. C'était l'une des nombreuses décisions stratégiques.
It was one of the main strategic decisions made by our government in the wireless sector to reach our clear objective, to offer more choice at lower prices and a better service to Canadian consumers.
More choice, lower prices, and better services. We have taken deliberate action on a number of fronts in the wireless sector. Premièrement, nous approuvons aucune.
We have not approved any requests for the transfer of spectrum which would reduce competition in the wireless sector. We've also limited foreign investment in telecommunications.
And how cell tower locations are identified and how they move forward. That's why we introduced new rules to require wireless companies to share cell towers whenever they can so that fewer towers are needed in our communities. And, of course, we mandated community consultation on all cell tower construction to ensure that communities have a voice in how new cell towers are offered and introduced into their communities. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities welcome this and join me at my announcement, and these changes are already making a real difference in communities all across the country. We've also capped wholesale wireless roaming rates to promote greater competition. We've also empowered the CRTC to impose financial penalties on wireless carriers that don't play by the rules. And in 2015, we will also be holding the 2500 megahertz spectrum auction with rules specifically designed to benefit consumers, particularly those Canadians who live in rural communities. Simply put, we are connecting Canadians like never before, both with our broadband strategy and with our wireless policies. And of course, Canada's information and communications technology sector is one of Canada's key economic drivers, generating $155 billion in revenue each year, contributing over $67 billion to Canada's economy, and creating over 570,000 well-paying jobs all across this country. To sustain these considerable contributions, our government is committed to ensuring our employees, our students, our researchers, our businesses all have the skills and opportunities that are necessary to succeed in our global economy. Ainsi, par l'entremise de Canada numérique.
So through Digital Canada 150, $200 million, new dollars, will be used to help SMEs to use digital technology. There will also be an additional $300 million in venture capital, which will be provided to the digital sector. $40 million will be provided for 3,000 internships. $3,000 will be provided for incubators. $36 million will be provided to community programs to create public libraries for organizations, not-for-profit organizations, and to Aboriginal communities to provide them with the material that students need to participate in the digital sector.
Of San Jose and San Francisco to discuss Canada's digital advantage with some of the world's leading technology companies, including Google, Twitter, Microsoft, and Facebook. There, I hosted a digital innovation forum where I partnered with Canadian entrepreneurs to sell Canada as the Silicon Valley of the North. I was told firsthand how Canadian companies across Canada are leading digital technology innovation and positioning Canada as a top investment destination. Mark Barenshade, who's the CEO of OpenText, Canada's largest software company, he put it this way. He said, quote, "We chose Canada because of the highly educated workforce, Canada's strong university partnerships, and our robust and innovative startup communities. The digital economy is the engine that will drive Canada's growth and prosperity, and technology innovation is the fuel that will power that engine." And of course, our government understands that a strong digital economy requires strong protections for Canadians when they surf the web or shop online. In this Parliament, we've tabled the Digital Privacy Act. Our Digital Privacy Act will require organizations to inform consumers when their personal information has been lost or stolen. Companies that fail to do so or deliberately break the rules will face fines of up to $100,000. These
new measures will also be accompanied by rigorous rules to make sure that vulnerable Canadians, including children, fully understand the repercussions or the consequences that the collection and the use of their personal information can have when used by companies. The Digital Privacy Act will also force the privacy or provide more powers to the Privacy Commissioner to take action. I met with the Commissioner, Chantal Bernier, before we tabled the bill. I'd like to thank her for her support for our government's action.
Digital Privacy Act. She said, quote, "The legislation contains very positive developments for the privacy rights of Canadians. I'm pleased that the government has addressed issues such as breach notifications, and I welcome the proposals in this bill." And of course, this committee will have an opportunity to study that legislation, offer suggestions on how the bill might be improved as we go forward. On science, We are working on a renewed science, technology, and innovation strategy, a long-term plan to position Canada as a globally recognized leader in research and business innovation. We're making record investments as a country in these areas to push the boundaries of knowledge, increase prosperity, and improve the quality of life of Canadians. As a result, Canada leads the G7 in research and development investments at universities, colleges, and in research institutions, and has one of the most educated populations in all the world. Canadians who witnessed the extraordinary success of Commander Chris Hadfield as commander of the International Space Station and his mission will know that Canada has an extremely proud history of accomplishment in space. We were the third country in the world to put our own research satellite into orbit and the first to have our own communications satellite. And earlier this year, I announced a new space policy for Canada, a framework that will guide our future in space. And I was very pleased to have the support, I must say, of not only Commander Hadfield and current and past astronauts, but also Marc Garneau, of course, a member of a colleague of ours in the House of Commons who we reached out to prior to tabling this, who offered his support for our policy as well. Because as we approach our 150th birthday in 2017, we want to ensure a strong and commercially competitive space industry that will continue to inspire Canadians for years to come, and of course all the associated sciences. Le Canada possède une industrie de l'aérospatiale.
Canada has an aerospace industry which is very dynamic. It employs more than 160,000 people in high-paying jobs, and also which contributes to the tune of $27 billion to the Canadian economy. The Canadian Association of Aerospace Industries has applauded our plan, saying that we've recognised the importance of Canadian innovation and that we've recognised our major heritage in space.
The new Canadian government support for the space industry, and which will contribute to new jobs in the space economy. On the auto sector, Mr. Chair, the auto industry is, of course, one of the cornerstones of the manufacturing sector of the Canadian economy. It contributes $16.1 billion annually to our economy, which represents about 10% of Canada's total manufacturing GDP. Our budget this year nearly tripled our investment in Canada's manufacturing sector, with an additional $500 million in support to Canada's automotive industry through the Automotive Innovation Fund. And I'll give you an example of how this has thus far worked. Last year, I announced a $72 million loan to transform Ford's Oakville assembly plant. Today, that plant has the flexibility to produce 11 of Ford's high-volume mid-size vehicles, including the newly redesigned Ford Edge and the Lincoln MKX, on one platform. This will make this plant one of only five Ford facilities capable of doing this work worldwide. En effet, les ventes ont repris et
sales have recovered and now stand at 20% above pre-recession levels. A recent report shows that our government is on the right track. The Canadian manufacturing receipts stood at $51 billion in March, higher than 2008.
Return to a balanced budget by 2015. And our government is working diligently to move forward with these measures and others to stand up for consumers, to strengthen Canada's digital economy, and to boost our financial position through innovation and research. By focusing on these priorities that I've outlined here today, our government is delivering the results for Canadians that we asked the mandate to deliver on. Je serai maintenant heureux de répondre aux questions des membres du comité.
I'll be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, just with some simple math, you can tell that we have 5 minutes per member with very little flex time. So I just want to say to our witnesses as well as my colleagues, please forgive me in advance if I interrupt you, because we have to keep it pretty tight in order to be able to finish within the time frame that we have allotted to us. Mr. Lake, good to see you. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister. I'm going to start with rural broadband, if I could. Just, one of the challenges, and you touched on this in your opening comments, so one of the challenges we have in this country is, 34 million people spread over a very, very, very wide geographic area. Obviously creates some challenges. We've done some big things in that area. I know that we've invested in successive budgets, again in Budget 2014, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the importance of rural broadband and what the government's doing to address those geographic challenges that we have.
Sure. Look, as one of the reasons I call it Digital Canada 150, as I said, is because At the time of Canada's Confederation, what was next for connecting and building this country was the railway. Then, of course, since then, we've built the Trans-Canada Highway, ports, airports. We've done all kinds of things to connect this country together. Of course, that requires maintenance. It's not cheap in a country as large as ours, with a climate such as ours. But what's next, in my view, going forward, is the digital gap that exists across this country. We've taken actions as a government in the past. Previous governments have as well taken actions in the past to try to gap this divide. And it was interesting having a conversation with former Industry Minister John Manley and the challenges that he had not that long ago, by the way, not that long ago, in trying to overcome some of the challenges that this country faced. But because of such rapid adaptation and because it has been a priority for governments, where we are today is, I think, a real position of envy around the world. You know, when you go to far-off Aboriginal communities, when you go to very rural and remote parts of this country, people who are working in some of the parts of our country where we're working in natural resources, you realize very quickly how you can be stranded technologically. And the gap that that causes in terms of learning opportunities for kids, health services to be delivered, economic opportunities to participate in the world markets with local goods and services that are offered around the world, a massive divide is created, and it has to be fixed. So what we're proposing to do is a $305 million one-time investment over the coming 5 years, which will shorten this gap. And by the way, there's a specific reason why we say 5 megabits per second is because 5 megabits is considered the floor of the international standard of what constitutes high-speed internet around the world. It allows for the streaming of a 720 HD video on any device in that footprint that has that download speed. So the capacity is important, the speed is important, and it raises Canada to an international standard. But what we say is that that's the floor. And when we get when we work in partnership with the private sector to build this infrastructure going forward, that's going to be the minimum standard going forward. But it's essential that we connect communities and that all Canadians feel part of the fact of the digital future that's on its way, and we have to prepare for it. And building this infrastructure is the responsibility of all of us collectively. You know, there were some people who thought, who were critical of this, I know when we announced this in the budget, saying, why is this the role of the government? Why the private sector can do this? We've been waiting, I think, for a very long time for the private sector to step up and ante up and build this infrastructure, and frankly, it hasn't happened. And there's too steep of a divide between urban and rural, and it's too large of a gap, and the communities are being too far left behind from these opportunities. So the way in which we're going to go ahead and invest this money in partnership with the private sector, moving it forward, when we announce the details soon, you'll see that what we are in fact doing is pushing this country forward in a way that I think makes perfect sense to ensure that we stay competitive in all parts of our country.
On the digital economy, in my experience here in Parliament, there are few areas of government engagement that would be more consulted on or more commented on than digital economy. Maybe talk a little bit about the stakeholder consultation process and the feedback that we've received since then.
Sure. The consultations began actually back in 2010. Here we are in 2014. Of course, a number of things happened between consultation, receipt of consultation, principally, of course, the global recession and our fiscal capacity to invest in a project as large as this, one. Two, of course, the 2011 federal election campaign, which caused a time gap as well. And also, now that we are post-recession, we talked in the early days back in 2009, 2010 about a digital economy strategy. That was language that made sense then, at that time, given the dynamic of the conversation that was being had. But if you look at the Digital Canada 150 program that is before you, it has 5 pillars. One of the 5 is the digital economy strategy, which is getting maximum economic benefit from the digital universe. But there are 4 other pillars as well, to broaden out and to frame all the benefits that come to Canada from us taking full advantage of the digital fact as we head into 2017. You know, securing Canadians and protecting Canadians online. The digital economy strategy is part of it as well. Ensuring that we are telling Canadian stories, so the content on the digital platforms. We've created the Canada Media Fund. We're supporting the NFB and Telefilm Canada as they make more Canadian content available all around the world. So the filling out of all 5 of these pillars and all that they constitute, making the Government of Canada more digital itself and connecting Canadians, those are the 5 pillars in total. And they have 39 specific action items in all of them. Taken together, make this a very comprehensive plan that has been very well received in all parts of the country.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sorry to our time. It's just the closing in on us, Madam Quach, for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the Minister for being with us today. I have a question. Well, I have several questions, in fact. The first deals with Statistics Canada. Several economists and several experts have spoken about the changes that have been made at StatsCan. and they've said that income inequality has not decreased. Quite the opposite, in fact. Your government claims that the inequality has gone down. But given the lack of comprehensive data from the National Household Survey, which is a voluntary survey which replaces the compulsory detailed or long-form census, could you tell us what measures your government has taken to replace the long-form census? And of course, this long-form census was much more comprehensive. The new process is much expensive. Several households, thousands of households, in fact, have not been covered in a census and has increased, in fact, the cost of the previous census by $29 million. Could you tell us what the government's actually doing? Well, your question is very timely. I was just at a meeting this morning with Wayne Smith, who's the chief statistician at Statistic Canada. We're looking at 2016 and the next National Household Survey, and we're looking at ways of improving the situation as compared to the situation in 2011. But we do have useful data which represent 87% of the Canadian population. This is a voluntary, of course, survey which has a response rate which is equivalent to other household surveys. In my opinion, I think really that we have the necessary information, valid information, quality information, and it's quite we're quite able to use this information. I'd just like to interrupt you, Minister. Now, the level of non-response is 33%. This is compared to 5.5% under the long-form census. In Quebec, for example, well, the data is so imprecise that in Grosse-Île, for example, fewer than 5% of people actually answered the survey. It cost $29 million more in terms of only compared to the long-form service. Professors, specialists, or experts are saying that this is completely inefficient. I don't know what you intend to do to replace this program. Now, there are companies, businesses, and municipalities are saying that this data is not usable. It's not usable for targeting the most vulnerable populations in their areas. Even teachers, I'm a former teacher myself, have looked at ways of trying to help students with their education. Now, this new form is so mediocre that the data is gives data which is too imprecise. Well, there's only 4%, in fact. Well, in Grosse-Île, in Quebec, 20%, 20% in Cumberland House in Saskatchewan, Macadam Village, 20.3%, in fact. Well, you have to understand that it's important to point out that in the past, in previous censuses, there were also problems with communities, rural communities. It's not because of the changes that we made in 2011. I know that StatsCan is looking at these specific cases, of course, to resolve the issues. There have always been problems. Of course, we're the 37th largest population in the world. There are always concerns with all the censuses we've conducted. Now, if you'd like to ask Wayne Smith to speak to this committee, I'm sure if you ask him to come, he will point to the things that we're doing to resolve the issues that were raised in 2011. I don't know if Mr. Nubley has anything to add here. Well, the Auditor General, in fact, has made recommendations. Well, I'd just like to make a comment. The Auditor General even recommended that smaller regions' needs should be looked at more carefully. I think it's a very clear recommendation. You've talked about scientific research. Now, the Conservatives have cut $500,000 in tax credits for research and development for the manufacturing sector. All the manufacturing companies I've consulted have said that this has a negative impact on their performance domestically and internationally. They say that they need this money for scientific research, but you cut it.
Thank you very much. I think, yeah. Thank you so much, Minister, for being here. It's always exciting to hear. It doesn't matter what ministry you have. It's you're making changes and making things happen. And there's a couple of things that I'd like to follow up on. And certainly the $5.27 billion wireless auction results is one of them. But first, if I could start with how Digital Canada 150, which is a wonderful nation-building exercise in my view. You're not only addressing the business requirements that we obviously are very motivated to create jobs and growth and long-term prosperity, but you have linked this 150 digitization with our history, with our nation's history, with our cultural history, and you're making that more accessible for all Canadians. Now, I still remember the traveling show of King Tut's artifacts when I was a little girl, and it came to the Winnipeg Art Gallery. But you're making that accessible. You're making all kinds of things that we have in vaults right now accessible. If you could talk about that, and because that clearly is saving us as Canadians lots of money.
Well, and coming from Winnipeg, you know what I think great institutions look like when they're well organized. Of course, the Manitoba Museum with its brilliant display of the Hudson Bay Company, the new Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which will be opening very soon, and of course the Winnipeg Art Gallery is a brilliant building. So Winnipeg, certainly for a city of its size, is host to some of the great cultural institutions of Canada. But you're quite right. As we go forward to our 150th birthday, and part of Digital Canada 150 is about that. Once you build the infrastructure and you connect Canadians, once you make it more secure, once you take advantage of the economic opportunities, and once government is acting in a more digital way, those are the first four pillars. The fifth one, to me, is the most fun one, the more interesting one, is you fill all of that with Canadian culture, Canadian content, and Canadian stories going forward to our 150th birthday. It's the responsible thing to do. We have created the Canadian Museum of History, which is formerly the Museum of Civilization, given it a new mandate, $25 million new dollars. They have 3 million items in their collection. Over 90% of them are sitting in storage. And we want to get that stuff pulled out of there and moving all across the country through museum partnerships in all museums in all sizes in all parts of this country, so that local museums can tell stories of either local or national history, develop their own narratives, but have access to those 3 million items in the national collection that are sitting in storage, and to get Canadians thinking about, talking about, and building thematics that make sense for local museums all across the country. Again, not contrary to the to the partisan attacks, not us telling museums, but giving museums access so they can tell whatever story that they want to tell, and to get things moving around this country. And in a digital context, here's one thing that I'm most proud of. When I became Heritage Minister, I was told about the Memory Project early in 2008 when I became Minister, and I got very frustrated by the intransigence of, at that time, the Department of Heritage and what it was not doing to support this project. Here's the project in simple form. It makes brilliant sense when you think about it. In 2011, I believe it was, we sadly lost the last surviving veteran of the First World War. The average age of a World War II veteran today is 91, and the generation is sadly passing away quickly. We failed with the World War I generation to properly catalog and tell their stories and to treat them as the treasures that they are for future generations. So the Memory Project, through the Historica Dominion Institute, not just Historica, they had a pretty simple, very cheap, but very effective idea. And they said, we want to work with veterans organizations and legions all across the country. We will go to them and we will reach out to veterans of the Second World War, and we're going to invite them to tell their stories. We'll come to them and we'll digitize their story with a video camera if they're comfortable, or just audio if they're comfortable. They can tell us whatever aspect of their time of service that they're comfortable with. If it was their training, their time in battle, their time after the war, maybe they met the love of their life, maybe they experienced the most traumatic loss of their life of a friend. Whatever aspect of their service that they want to share, in whatever format that they want to share, we'll come to them and they can come into us and we'll meet and we'll share their story. Digitize it and protect it forever, and house it at the Canadian War Museum, which is also part of the Canadian History Museum, and house it forever. And they've done that now. And we provided extra funding for that to make sure it was complete, and now they're extending it as well to the Korean War generation, of course, from 50 to 53, and that generation, which is also, of course, getting older as well. And so we want to digitize and protect, and for a very small amount of money, we've been able to do that. So Digital Canada 150, as I said, it's not just about cell towers and PIPEDA and intellectual property law. It's greater than that. You build the infrastructure and you connect Canadians together. Why? To take advantage of the economic opportunities, of course, But most importantly for me, the great task of any government is always to leave this country more united and prosperous than the way in which you found it. It's the forever challenge of Canada, is to making sure that this country stays united and strong going forward. And we can't stay united and strong when young Canadians don't know our history, we can't name our previous prime ministers, we don't know the sacrifices that people have made, and we don't appreciate our collective history, not just our individual history. And we need to be able to tell our stories one to another. That's why we built the History Museum. That's why it's a central piece of the Digital Canada policy, is to make sure that we're telling our stories one to another in a comprehensive way.
And in a cost-effective way.
That's all the time that we have. We're way over. Now, Madam Scroll for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Minister Moore, for coming. We appreciate that very much. I've got 3 questions for you. So if you could position your answers to be sufficient enough to get my 3 questions in there. The digital strategy that is not really as forward-looking, in my opinion, as part of the opposition. As you indicated, we were waiting for it for 2008. Well, the things were moving very, very quickly. But as an example, the government has promised to allocate $200 million to support small and medium-sized businesses. But when used over the promised 5-year period of time, it comes out to nothing more than $1.14 per Canadian. Now, how are we going to be able to assist Canada's businesses in the digital economy when we have money for F-35s and for jails, but we only have $1.14 for something as important, as you indicated earlier, as the digital strategy? Even if it took 5 years to get it, I appreciate the fact that you've released it, but I don't see it as forward-looking when there's only $1.14 going to be allocated per Canadian.
If I may, that's a very narrow way of looking at all that we're doing for small business. That's one envelope, but of course we have the Venture Capital Action Plan as well. We also have all the suite of programs that are offered through BDC. We also, of course, offer one of the lowest costs of starting up businesses in Canada. We have the lowest taxes in Canada in 55 years. We've lowered taxes, as you've heard us say many times, over $3,000 for the average family. And this has been praised by and supported by the Canadian Chambers of Commerce, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, those who represent small businesses that you're describing, who have come out and said Digital Canada 150 is a huge step in the right direction to supporting small businesses and encouraging their growth. So we can disagree, and partisanship being what it is, you can flick a jab at me if you like, but those who are in the business of advocating for small business like what we're doing.
It is a step. I think it's not a big enough step, but again, that's everybody has their own viewpoint. It doesn't even have to be partisan. But your strategy also promises that BDC will spend $300 million on venture capital. Well, as an example, Samsung spent more than $400 million on U.S.-based ads alone in 2012. Apple spent $333 million in 2012. So how are we going to be a world leader when single companies spend more in a single year and we're spending so very little?
Well, look, we could spend more, but I think it would betray our commitment to Canadians to balance the budget. We could spend more, but I don't think that this is entirely a role for the state or for government. We have funds that are set aside through the BDC, and they do spend money and do spend it efficiently, but they support enterprises in a way that commercial banks don't. It's a unique mandate that they have, of course, at the BDC, and the way in which they support small business. And I believe the ratio is well over 90% of all their grants go to small businesses, which are defined as businesses under 20 employees. So I mean, the amount of support that they're giving is quite extensive. We could do more, but I think part of the answer lies in your question, which is if you look to other jurisdictions around the world, whether it's Samsung or others, these are private sector investments in enterprises in the future. It is a challenge for this country, has always been. It was under your government, it is under our government, of getting a greater return and a greater investment into skills training and into growth and into venture capital by the private sector. And that's why Joe Oliver, I know, it's a central part of his mandate that he's spoken about now as Finance Minister and the Prime Minister, to incent the private sector to further invest into Canada in the way that they are in other jurisdictions on the world. And it is a challenge, and it's not entirely, of course, the role for the government to be directing all this. In fact, one of the best things that the government can do is get out of the way and provide the conditions for more attractive investment, not to direct investment.
Miss, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm
Sorry,
waiting for a chair to cut me off very quickly. But the billions of dollars that's being spent on advertising for programs that don't exist.
Billions.
Billions. And various other capacities when you advertise, look at them all up when it comes to program advertising. Would it not be better to look, instead of spending all of that money there, to more focus those advertising dollars in whatever, I'm not talking only on the digital strategy side, but in all other capacities of the areas that you want to promote, rather than spending $10 million was $100 million actually was spent just on advertising programs that didn't even exist. And it was more about advertising the government than it was advertising solid, straight programs.
Well, look, people can be critical of some particular advertising campaigns or not. But if you are critical of government advertising, then you should be happy that we're spending less than your government did, which is, I think, a good thing. But also, I think, we have a number of initiatives that the government is putting forward. Whether it's the tax-free savings account, or if it's particular support for particular industries, or for shifting from a 5 to a 10-year passport, or you take my point, when the government introduces new aspects of regulation of government services, of new opportunities for Canadians, we have to make sure that Canadians are informed of it. It gets, I suppose, stigmatized by the opposition as always being, partisan or government patting on itself advertising, but it certainly isn't the case. And if you look at the sweep of advertising that we've put forward as a government, we think it's perfectly reasonable, and all levels of government do it. Your government did it and spent more than we did, and we think it's important that Canadians know what programs are available that they're paying for.
Thank you, Minister. Now on to Mr. Van Kesteren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming here. And I echo what was said by my colleague. I think you bring a passion and a vision to this, and I think that's something that sometimes is sadly lacked is vision. And I commend you on your endeavor with the digital processes that are being put in place. Down my neck of the woods in Chatham, Kent, Essex, of course, it was once known as the auto sector. And we've lost a lot of that. That's due to, I think, what happened in 2008 to what was formerly known as the big three, now the Detroit Three. You mentioned in your opening remarks how that was still an integral part of this government and your ministry's mandate, and to maintain that sector. And I wonder if you could just elaborate for the committee on what you're doing and what the industry is doing to help make sure that that's going to be something that's there for a long time.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot to be said. Obviously, this is an industry that has had its challenges, but we, I think, have responded effectively as a government over the years to the challenges of Canada's auto industry. Of course, Canadian taxpayers were very generous to the auto industry during the recession. The money has come back from those firms largely, and it is a real challenge, particularly when you counterbalance that with what we're facing in the United States. When the dollar is near par, that creates a real stress and challenge for the Canadian industry. When frankly, straight-up corporate welfare, as a government of Canada, we have the Auto Innovation Fund, which is a loan, a repayable loan that is taxable, that comes back to Canadian taxpayers. There was an example in the state of Kentucky, just the one state of Kentucky, $700 million in cash in a greenfield site was offered to an auto assembly plant manufacturer to go to the state of Kentucky. Now, that is a policy with which we should not and cannot compete as a country. What we can do is do other things that, in my view, are more fiscally responsible, are more conservative, and are more effective. First is we signed the Canada-Europe Trade Agreement, CETA, the Comprehensive European Trade Agreement. CETA will create 500 million new customers for any automobile that's manufactured in Canada. That's an advantage for an auto assembler and manufacturer in Canada that does not exist in the United States. Canada has a 13% lower corporate tax rate here than they have in the United States. We also have, frankly, socialized medicine in Canada, a financial burden on firms in the United States that doesn't exist in Canada, which is a big economic advantage. We have an educated and thoughtful workforce in Canada that has been, you look at the Brampton plants of Chrysler and others that are operating past 100 full capacity and are turning out phenomenal products that are award-winning products around the world. Add to that the fact that we're twinning the Detroit-Windsor border crossing. We have the Beyond Borders initiative so that cars that are manufactured in Canada have easier access to the United States. You take all those things together, support for the recession, lower taxes, European free trade deal, advantages on social programs and training, making the border more seamless with the United States, all of that taken together, plus the Auto Innovation Fund, creates a very, I think, effective and a package of public policies that support industry versus what's happening in Mexico or versus what's happening in the United States, where they're driving forward with greenfield sites, straight corporate welfare, driving to right-to-work states in a way that, frankly, we can't compete with in Canada, and we ought not to, certainly on the financial side. So we have our challenges with the auto industry. It will continue to be a file that we'll have to watch going forward. But there are some good stats. I mean, the auto industry posted its best April sales ever with a 4% jump this year from April of last year. Chrysler recorded a rise in sales of 6%, its best April in over a quarter of century. Nissan Canada posted a 30% sales gain in April. So, you know, we do have some good news from the auto sector. We're going to continue to be challenged because of the dynamic in the United States, but we'll react effectively because it's a critical part of the Canadian economy.
Very quickly, you touched on some of the good work that's been done by this government with the trade deals, but we have some serious issues. It's been an ongoing issue, I think, with the trade barriers that exist between provinces. And I wonder if you could just address that quickly.
Maybe I'll come back to it then. But the agreement on internal trade, the AIT, which was first put in place by the Liberal government in reaction to the FTA, has had some successes, but it's time for a refresh, and I am working on it. The AIT committee, which is the 13 provinces and territories, and myself, so 14 people. It's chaired this year by Minister Oswald of Manitoba, and we're working aggressively with them. Frankly, we're waiting for the Ontario provincial campaign to resolve itself. We'll know who the government is there, and we'll have an opportunity to move forward.
Thank you very much, Minister. Monsieur Nantel, pour 5 minutes.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, Mr. Moore. We haven't seen each other for a while. It's great to see you again. That's right. I'd just like to talk to you about the aerospace industry. I won't be talking about culture right off the bat because the Saint-Hubert aerospace industry is present in Quebec. Now, this is a major sector for Canada, 5th in the world. But the budget's been cut since 2012. Major cuts in this area. In May 2014, you announced a new initiative, but the sector still wants tangible initiatives. How do you intend to support the industry with only $30 million over 5 years? The Emerson report was asking for $90 million. Well, that's, I think, in the Emerson report, there were 16 recommendations. That's right, 16. We agree with 14 and a half of them. The half of them is the amount that he suggested. In fact, well, to be frank here, it would have limited our fiscal wiggle room. Now, with the approach that we've implemented, Susan Benoit, you know her, she's the president of Aéreo Montreal, she said,
in the Aerospace Review Report, the Emerson Report, they are great news for Quebec and will support innovation and development in future space technologies. Alors ça, celles qui sont dans le secteur,
in the sector, in fact, in Quebec and in Montreal, who were involved in this area of the economy, while they strongly support this new initiative. Of course, it's a sector that needs a lot of support, a lot more support, in fact. The Canadian Space Agency has seen cuts of $89 million, 2012-2013. Investment in new space technology has gone from 20 to 4 million. This has a natural synergy with business across the country. How do you intend to help the agency to remain competitive and to innovate with the cut of this size? While there's an amount of investment year over year, but we don't necessarily have a demand for that amount every year. The C-Series, the Bombardier C-Series, well, investment will end soon. I think we're up to $50 million. That's coming to an end. How much was it exactly? 54 million. Okay. 55. It's not bad. That's coming to an end now. Does this mean that there's a cut or that the government will stop investing in this sector? That's not what it means. It really means that there were short-term projects that are coming to an end, and of course we'll have to look at new projects for the future. Now, in this sector, there's no lack of demand for subsidies, but this has to be done in a way that really reacts effectively to needs, real needs. Now, Minister Moore. it goes without saying that we have to act quickly. Things are moving quickly. I hope that I'll have the opportunity to speak to you about the report on digital issues that came out in 2011. Now, intellectual property, the Budget Implementation Act made changes to the Trademark Act to harmonize our rules here in Canada with the Madrid Protocol. Several stakeholders have talked to us about this, and they've testified before several communities, the Chamber of Commerce, manufacturing industry of Canada also, and they say that they're fundamentally against this act, which makes changes to trademarks, and it says that there will be additional costs for SMEs. And it says that it will open up loopholes in the use of trademarks. Will you listen to the recommendations made by these witnesses who ask you to rescind these changes to the Trademark Act? Well, we're always listening. But don't forget that these treaties were signed in 2001. There was a lot of discussion at that point on them. We have consulted with all stakeholders, but this protocol and international treaties are very important for us and for Canadian business because we're being negatively affected.
That you're referring to that are in Bill C-31. The Madrid Protocol allows for the registration of trademarks in multiple jurisdictions through a single international application, which is filed with the International Bureau of the World Intellectual Property Organization. The Singapore Treaty, the second of the three, establishes standards and rules related to procedures in national trademarks offices to clarify what they can and cannot require from applicants. And the third, the Nice Agreement, governs the Nice classification, a list of different types of goods and services for which businesses may use a trademark with, and is required for accession to the Singapore Treaty and the Madrid Protocol, which are also...
Here's why Monsieur, that's all the time we have. Sorry, that's it. We're over. Apologize, Minister. Mr. Mantel. Now on to Mr. Warwoff for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and very interesting discussion. In fact, Minister, you wanted to complete your statement, and then I have a question for you.
Yeah, I just want to say, look, I appreciate the concerns that have been raised. As the official opposition, you're doing your job and being a megaphone for the concerns that have been raised. But frankly, it's our view that the concerns are not. We just frankly don't agree. These are IP treaties that make perfect sense, and I can understand why some, particularly the Canadian Bar Association, aren't terribly big fans of this. If you're a Canadian, and it's, by the way, there's a reason why these protocols are also consolidated in our Digital Canada 150 plan. It's because if you're a Canadian innovator and you want to get a patent, and you have to hire a patent lawyer, and it costs between $3,500 and $5,000 to secure a patent for your idea, and you want to make sure a patent troll doesn't sit on your idea and steal your idea, information is instantly global. And if you file a patent in Canada, we want it to be protected around the world. So patent lawyers who could charge you $3,500 to register a patent in every single country in the world, yeah, they're going to be upset. But guess who benefits? Small businesses who benefit. Small businesses who have to register patents and protect their IP are going to benefit greatly from these reforms. So the idea here, of course, is very simple, which is why all other countries who are signatories have ratified these agreements, is because they're ahead of the game. We're behind the game. We need to ratify these agreements so that Canadians whose livelihood is dependent on protecting their intellectual property, that they have the capacity to protect it internationally, and it's not going to make it impossible for them to protect themselves. So I would just say to my colleague, as Bill C-31 moves forward, and I guess it's considered over at the Finance Committee, not this committee, if the NDP has suggestions on how you might amend this, bring them forward. But I think it's a pretty straightforward idea to protect Canadians' IP on an international level, not just domestic, number one. And number two, I think it's pretty easy to understand why those who are opposed to it are opposing it because of their self-interest.
So thank you, Minister. The fact is, I'm quite impressed that the NDP have asked questions on this, Chair. When we had the witnesses, we heard actually the opposite, that the vast majority do support Canada becoming in line internationally with the standards, trademark standards. It provides effective efficiencies. It actually is good for business in Canada. And the NDP, to the point on that issue, they didn't have any more questions. So now, Minister, you're here, the TV cameras are on. We have some good questions and some good answers in And actually, we heard from the marketplace that this is what Canada needs to do to be competitive. In fact, as I was looking at the 3 mandated strategic outcomes that are necessary from in Industry Canada, and it's that 1, the Canadian marketplace is efficient and competitive. And Minister, that's exactly the action that you're taking is accomplishing. And 2, advancements in science and technology, knowledge, innovation, strengthen the Canadian economy. And 3, Canadian business and communities are competitive. And again, this is what you're doing. You started off your comments saying that you want to create jobs and economic growth, and you're doing that. Could you just elaborate on the importance of international trade and also Fairness at the Pumps Act? That's another great success of the government, making sure that Canadians are paying less and we have more efficiencies and businesses are being more competitive.
Well, the Fairness of the Pumps Act, is something that we adopted in Parliament. It's been well received. We've provided new powers for the independent application of it. We put in the regulations in order to make it a reality and to enforce it. And inspections have happened, and there have been some violations that have been found, and these regulations have been, I think, reinforced effectively. On the trade side, as British Columbians, for example, we often say it, but I don't think we can say it enough, that this country, when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister of Canada, Canada had 5 free trade agreements signed, free trade agreements with 5 jurisdictions around the world: the United States, Mexico, Chile, Israel, and Costa Rica. Today we have free trade agreements with 43 countries around the world, and as British Columbians, we should be particularly enthused about the Canada-South Korea Free Trade Agreement. Over 50% of Canada's trade with South Korea comes from the province of British Columbia. The South Korea is the size of New Brunswick, with almost double the population of Canada. It's a focused market in a strategic area of the world, and for us to have signed that FTA, which of course will have to be ratified by Parliament of Canada, is a tremendous step forward for the Asia Pacific. Premier Clark and others, we talk about the Asia Pacific Gateway. We've built the infrastructure at home, and we're making sure that we have access to markets around the world, and it'll be a big step forward in us seeing success with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or possibly with the Canada-Japan FTA in that region as well.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Roy. Now on to Mr. Massey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for coming here today. A very interesting project with the veterans that you're going to undertake there. I think you're getting a lot of footage of veterans saying they didn't want their veterans office closed, like the What Am I riding? I would like to know, though, how much did it cost for the commercials? You come in and paint quite an interesting picture about wireless and service in Canada, but you spent how many millions on commercials to Canadians?
The exact number I don't know, and I don't want to mislead you, so my Treasury Board can get that for you. But I do know that what we were counteracting, by the way,
and that's
what we were counteracting, $5.5 million ad campaign by incumbents who didn't like the idea of us having a policy that might have created more competition. A $5.5 million ad campaign that was dishonest, patently dishonest, misrepresented government policy on a number of levels. And we had an obligation, I think, to push back and to make sure that Canadians who were being misled by this ad campaign about the substance of our wireless policies. And this is not, by the way, a side thing. This is a section of the Canadian economy where it has a 25% growth in jobs in the wireless sector over the past 5 years, thereabouts, according to Stats Canada. So it's a growing fact of the Canadian economy. Everything that you do and I do, that we all do, is migrating on digital. Phones cost more than computers now. Everything is migrating onto mobile devices. And when you have incumbent 3 large companies pouring millions of dollars into an ad campaign to deliberately mislead the public about a government policy, it requires pushback. And so we push back.
Now I want to move on to the border file. The Windsor-Detroit corridor, the border there, the busiest international crossing. Work's being done. Billions of dollars has been spent to provide a new roadway to the crossing. But the crossing itself in Detroit, there's been no secured funding for the American Plaza. What do you think about the situation, and what is the government actively doing on it?
I can tell you it's a concern. I've spoken certainly to Minister Baird about it. We're not going to, we do all this stuff I mean, I remember when you and I think, were on Transport Committee back many years ago, and I remember the Ontario Trucking Association had their famous presentation where they said you can go from Windsor to downtown Miami, and en route you'll go through exactly 17 stoplights, and 16 of the stoplights are in Windsor. We don't go through the process of cleaning all that out and building these effective routes of transportation and twinning the Detroit-Windsor crossing, and especially with all the funding that's been offered, without making sure that it's seamless and effective. I can tell you that this has been raised directly with Ambassador Heyman, and I know that Minister Baird is, because it's an international borders issue, not an industry issue, that this is an issue that is, I can tell you, front and center to ensure that this goes forward effectively.
Yeah, and because the reality is your government signed an agreement with the Americans that requires us to pay for it if we actually don't get that from the federal government. It has to come from the new consortium and the toll, so we would actually be fronting 100% of the cost of the new border crossing, which is rather unusual. I want to move over to trademarks, though, and there is some serious concerns about trademarks. I know that there are some self-interest. Everybody has self-interest in this game. But there was testimony at the Senate Finance Committee related that the challenges to trademarks would go up to at least 7 or 8%. Some argue even higher, but that was some of the testimony. Are you aware of that? And then right now it takes 9 months to actually get a hearing for the challenge. So it's 9 months now. If it doubles and triples, what are you going to do? Be prepared to actually expedite these things?
Sure.
Yeah, answer the specifics of that.
So there's not an expectation that there's actually going to be an increase in challenges. That has happened in a couple countries around the world, in particular in the European Union. And in the European Union, there isn't an examination process by which a lot of the weeding out of the poor quality trademarks happens. And that process is going to remain as Canada accedes to these treaties.
So you're saying Darlene Carreau's testimony is incorrect?
I'm saying that there's no, we've talked with intellectual property offices around the world as we looked at how countries were implementing it, and there has not been a dramatic increase in the type of trolling behavior focused on trademarks that some of the people who testified are claiming will happen in Canada.
Okay, we'll quickly move to the Auditor General with regards to her comments. Or his comments with regards to the concerns raised for wireless in the remote communities. What's your government and your department going to do to address the concerns that the Auditor General has raised?
In terms of wireless to remote communities, well, I mean, we have aggressive, for example, in the 700 megahertz spectrum, which constitutes the entirety of the footprint of Canada because of the success of the auction. There are very aggressive rollout times for, more aggressive than any other country in the world, by the way, more aggressive than even the AWS auction we had in 2008 in terms of rollout for rural communities, one. Two, the new rules that we announced for the 2500 megahertz spectrum auction, which takes place in the first quarter of 2015, also is tailor-made to ensure that rural communities are served very well as well. But no, look, it is a concern. We know it. I know it. You know it. Anytime you travel, even in British Columbia, you know, I go up and down Highway 97. You know, you go up Highway 97, and as soon as you turn off, you know, and you go 10 minutes down the road on either side, you lose your signal. That's not adequate, and we need to do better than that. So I'm not sure if Lawrence or...
That's all the time that we have on that question. Now on to Madam Gallant for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to our Minister. I'm going to ask a question about the impact of high-speed internet in rural Canada. Back in 2007, I recognized how important it was to get the parts of rural Canada, especially those with the topography that is very challenging, connected. We had a pilot project then that churches in the community all used their steeples to make sure there was line of sight, and all our schools finally became connected. And now you are building on this with the rollout of filling more broadband gaps. But the concern is being raised that particularly in rural Canada, as we become more connected, we do online banking, the need for tellers, the few jobs we have in small town Canada become obsolete. On the weekend, we had a symposium of community colleges at Algonquin College in Pembroke, and the keynote speaker, Ken Coates from the University of Saskatchewan, was telling us that there's a toilet on the way. It's already in Japan, where it will do a urine analysis, send an email to your doctor to, if anything is amiss, the doctor will send an email to your pharmacist, and the pharmacist will send an email to you to let you know that you have to pick up a prescription.
But it's been the policy of the committee that immediately when the bells go, I was hoping that you'd finish quickly, but when the bells go that we adjourn to go to the House. And so thank you very much, Minister. And
I'll just wrap by this saying, you're quite right. These services to rural Canadians that often are taken for granted in urban centres need to be extended through wired and wireless internet and all that. And it's been too long that these communities have been left behind. That's why we have this program. I will be announcing this in greater detail very soon. I'd be more than glad to come back to the committee and talk about it when we have that opportunity. But thanks to all parties for the opportunity. Mr.
Lake, did you have an intervention? No? Okay, colleagues, we'll adjourn, and then we need to come back and deal with the in regards to the votes, we'll be suspending for the vote and be returning, yes.